G'day everyone, I'm Ebony Bennett, Deputy Director at the Australia Institute, and welcome to our webinar series. Thanks so much for joining us this evening. We don't often do webinars in the evening, but we are very excited to have a special guest this evening, Mike Rann, former Premier of South Australia, for this week's webinar, Power Shift, Australia's Energy Future Beyond Fossil Fuels. I want to start by acknowledging that I live and work on Ngunnawal and Ngambri country and pay my respects to elders past and present. And just a reminder that you can register for future webinars at australiainstitute.org.au. And just a quick reminder that next week 2 weeks from now, on the 19th of September, we'll be joined by renowned journalist and author George Monbiot for another special webinar. So you can check out all the details for that at australiainstitute.org.au. A couple of quick bits of housekeeping for this evening. If you're joining us for the first time, you can type in questions for Mike Rann using our Q&A box in Zoom. You should also be able to comment on other people's questions and upvote them as well. A reminder to please keep things civil and on topic in the chat or we'll remove you. And finally, a reminder that this is a live event and this discussion is being recorded. It will go up on the Australia Institute's website sometime tomorrow. So I do want to thank you all very much for being here with us. We're here today to ask some pretty important questions like how influential is the fossil fuel lobby in Australia? What lessons can we learn from South Australia's extraordinary transition from coal to renewable energy? And how do the Australian government's climate policies affect our international relationships, whether that's in the Pacific or beyond? And so to help us answer all these questions, we're thrilled to be joined today by Mike Rann, who's the chair of the UK Climate Group and, of course, the former Premier of South Australia from 2002 to 2011. He was also the Climate Change Minister in South Australia, the first in Australia and the first in the world. And after he retired as Premier, the Australian government appointed Mike Rann as chair of its Greenbank Low Carbon Australia. So please welcome Mr. Mike Rann. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Evan. It's nice to be with you, and congratulations to the Australia Institute. It seems to be growing in clout in Australia, and I think that can only be a good thing.
Thank you very much. And thanks again for joining us this evening. I just wondered, for those who aren't familiar, if you could talk a little bit about the work that you've been doing in recent years, in particular with the UK Climate Group.
Yeah, the Climate Group was established exactly 20 years ago in the UK and is now quite a large international organisation. It's a not-for-profit, it's an NGO. It has, amongst its membership, we have what is called the Under 2 Coalition. We have about 200 state governments, California, New York, South Australia, New South Wales, but every continent of the world. And I got involved with the Climate Group back in about 2008. South Australia joined. We weren't the original members, but pretty soon after. And I found it incredibly useful to sort of borrow, steal, and lend ideas to others, to other political leaders of subnational governments. Why subnational is because, South Australia had to do what it did basically with the Howard government and in the face of climate deniers. So in the absence of national governments, same with people like California during the Trump years, the subnational state regional governments did the heavy lifting. So after I was out of politics, they asked me if I would join the board, which I had been since about 2017, and then a couple of years ago was elected as the chair. The headquarters is in the UK, but we're also in offices in New York, Delhi, Beijing, and Amsterdam. So we also have about 500 corporations that are committed to themselves becoming, net zero, and some of the world's biggest companies. And we don't tolerate greenwash. We have them audited every year to make sure what they've contracted to do actually happens. And we convene every September, so I'm going off in a couple of weeks Climate Week New York, which is the biggest event of its kind in the world. It's alongside the United Nations General Assembly, and we have about, I think this year we're hosting about 600 events through Climate Week. So, it's an advocacy. We are arguing. We work with governments to get their legislation right, to get their targets right. We also do work with EVs. We do work with steel companies on green steel, concrete companies on green concrete. So it's a privilege to be involved with the climate group.
Yeah, it sounds fantastic, and that's a huge number of events at Climate Week. But I did want to ask you to kind of kick us off on some kind of breaking news today. If we're here to talk about a future beyond fossil fuels, we had news today that Australia is looking at importing gas, which we know that Australia is one of the largest exporters of gas in the world, next to Qatar. So I just wondered if I could get your kind of reaction to that, because
It's
it's,
it's
yeah.
madness, total madness. I mean, to be Australia, I think 3/4 of our gas is exported. I think from if Western Australia alone exports about 90% of its massive gas. If it was a country itself, it'd be the third biggest exporter. So if we're in a situation where we're going to import gas, that is a huge failure of public policy over generations that we haven't insisted, ensured, legislated for, and invoked that legislation to require the gas companies to reserve gas to suit Australia's domestic needs. I mean, this will make us the laughing stock of the world, both in climate and also in energy circles. So it makes no sense to me.
Mm. And I wonder if I could just get your, I guess, overall take on where you see Australia is at currently when it comes to that response to the climate crisis, but in particular, that fossil fuel piece and moving away from fossil fuels. Where do you see the state of play for Australia currently?
I mean, I have to say that when I look at what the Albanese government's doing, it's light years better than its predecessors. That's number one. And there's been some really good things happening. I'm really pleased that, I mean, I think in the last day or so that Chris Bowen has announced a whole lot of grid connected, huge scale batteries. We've also got the Nature Positive summit coming up in Australia in October, and that is about us reaching our 30 by 30 goals. That's 30% of land, 30% of our seas being protected. And I think Australia is absolutely leading the charge on that. I mean, just recently they announced the Macquarie Island Reserve was being tripled, and the total no-take protected area bigger than Germany. So that was the biggest contribution in that area of 30 by 30 in the world in 2023. So a lot of good things happening. I would obviously want to see more happening. I think that, to me, I think that it is appalling that Australia is still approving coal mines or coal mine extensions. That just sends a terrible message to the world. I mean, and when I think about it, going back a few years, Australia's reputation back in about 2016, 17, 18, that era time, when I was in London, people just, I mean, we were pariahs. We were down there with Trump and Bolsonaro in Brazil in terms of not only what we did at home, but trying to frustrate any progress internationally through the COP. And, you kind of wondered why a country that was, I mean, it just seemed to me that the former Australian government looked like it was, half owned by the fossil fuel industry.
For
And so,
people who aren't aware how that kind of works, because, most
yeah,
of us will never go to a COP. I mean, what
yeah.
does that look like when you're talking about how Australia was kind of trying to spoil things there? What does that look like?
Like constantly trying to slow down progress. And it gets back to your fundamental, premise or issue today about the fossil fuel industry. At the last COP in Dubai, there were 2,500 fossil fuel lobbyists. And, they're like the rash you can't get rid of. So they're there under all sorts of different guises from industry associations, various. What are they there to do? At the moment, they've gone from, they can't get away, or even though they fund lots of organizations and academics around the world who argue against climate science, but essentially they've lost that argument. So what are they doing? They are there to delay. The lobbyists and the fossil fuel companies internationally, the name that they basically want to delay progress so they can keep making money. And it's interesting how that plays out. So it's exactly the same tactics of the tobacco industry in the 60s. Now, in the 1960s, I think it was early 60s, the medical authorities came out and said smoking causes cancer. There was denial. No, it doesn't. It's good for you and everything else. That went on for years, the denial that smoking caused cancer by the tobacco companies. Then they lost that argument. So what did they do? It was all about trying to delay legislation, donations to political parties, and so on. And then they came up with vaping. So we have a situation now where there's a sort of a shift in tactics by the fossil fuel industry, and that is that it's about delay as long as possible. Let's put some red herrings in there. I remember people coming to see me in the early 2000s and say, look, you don't need to do all of this stuff. There's going to be a technical fix. We're going to carbon sequestration. That was the big go. Still waiting for it. This is 20 years later. Actually, it's more than 20 years later. And then, of course, now we've got Peter Dutton talking about nuclear power. That is never going to happen. So what it's all about is delaying. It's 2040. Look, that'll be the fix. You don't need to do all of this stuff in the interim targets. We'll have it all fixed by nuclear power by 2050. It's total bullshit. This is all about delaying things so that their mates and donors in the of right-wing governments around the world can basically delay. It's about delaying action on climate in order to protect the fossil fuel industry.
I might come back a little bit to that as well, but that kind of leads me on to the role that you played in South Australia and its clean energy transition, because it's a real success story in Australia. So when you became the Premier in 2002, the state had, if I am correct, zero renewable energy generation. What has happened in South Australia for a start, and how did you accomplish that?
Well, it just seemed to me madness, and I was heavily influenced by people like Canadian environmentalist David Suzuki, Tim Flannery, and others. It seemed madness to me that South Australia had about the highest solar prospectivity in the world. It's the driest state and the driest continent, and that this wasn't being tapped. It's sort of free energy. We also have had very high wind prospectivity. But I think the message was, to me, was that if you're going to embark on decarbonisation, and we had this really dirty coal-fired plant up, and it was a very dirty coal, brown coal up in Port Augusta. If you're going to decarbonise, then you're going to have to bring people with you. So we did a whole lot of symbolic acts. We, solar powered had solar arrays on the Parliament, on the State Art Gallery, on the State Museum, on the Adelaide Airport, a new convention facility out at our agricultural showgrounds. We put enough array of solar on the roof that it had to be registered as a power station, and then we started doing it through the schools. So we put it on the roofs of the huge number of schools and integrated into the curriculum. Then we did things like we passed the first solar feed-in tariff in Australia, and then we saw a huge take-up in, so I think that it was one in 3 homes. I think it's better than that now in South Australia have rooftop solar. People then started saying we're getting money back from what we produce during the day. And then essentially what we did in terms of wind power is that there was, even in Howard's time, there was a provision back in 2004 that by the time of 2020, the eastern states national grid had to have 20% of the power had to come from renewables. That was a 20-year goal. The problem was that the power companies who thought we better get into this were finding it difficult to get approvals. They had to, they were getting blocked. It was sort of not in my backyard. They were getting blocked by local government. So what we did is we changed the regulations and made it much easier for the power companies to set up their wind farms in South Australia. And we did that by, and also I went out and met all the heads of the power companies, AGL and Origin and others, and said, we're going to make this easy for you. We have high wind prospectivity and we're hungry for it. So as a result of that, I mean, at one stage for some considerable time, we were getting about 66% of the investment in wind power in Australia, even though we've got less than 8% of the population. That was billions of dollars worth of investment. It wasn't costing us money, but we just made it easier. And then eventually other states sort of caught on what we were up to. So we had billions of investment in rooftop solar, and we had billions of investment in wind. I guess the end result of this is that South Australia is now, you mentioned zero, or pretty close to zero. I did have my own roof, solar powered, massive cost then. Now it's kind of tumbled down. So where I am now in Italy, we're totally solar powered. Is that when I think the last figures I saw were close to 73% of South Australia's power over a year comes from renewable energy. And that is a great tribute to this current government in South Australia. So it's been a continuum to Peter Malinauskas, Tom Koutsantonis, and also Susan Close, the 3 sort of ministers responsible for this. So they're about to legislate to change my legislation from 2007 to say that South Australia will be 100% powered by renewables by 2027, and that again puts South Australia in a world leadership position. And of course, it's at the same time we've been seeing a huge reduction in emissions already as a result of what we did in 2007 and what Jay Weatherill did. We've built the first big battery. It was sort of a Tesla battery, I think. It was then the biggest grid-connected battery in the world. We've now got, I know I saw something from AGL the other day that they've got more big batteries that are even bigger on their way. There's already one that they've established down at near Port Adelaide. So, it's what we've shown is that they're legislating for 60% cut in carbon emissions from 2005 levels by 2030. And, I think Australia's target is about 43%. So there's quite a big difference there. So what I would like to see, I'm pleased that other states are doing it, but there was a lot of cynicism from around Australia. We were told we couldn't do it. Now, when you're told you can't do things, do it, because basically what it is people wanting things as they are, and it's all about protecting someone's self-interest.
I think that's a just a really, I mean, it's so rare that you get good news stories in climate, and that idea that, South Australia just got on with the job essentially, and now they're well on their way to being net zero and 100% renewable. I mean, because you just did it. You just started on the road, as you said. I'm really interested in South Australia's experience, and then relating it back to, again, that global role that you're now involved in, because oftentimes we hear people say, Australia's just a small country, like it doesn't matter what we do. But as the third largest exporter of fossil fuels in the world, I mean,
Yeah,
Australia's actions really matter in actual fact. And I think, what does that South Australian experience show that Australia can do on the global stage if it, is making that real shift?
I think I mean, as I say, you have to bring people along with you and explain it. That's really important. And we were doing things like planting 3 million trees through Adelaide, metropolitan Adelaide, in order to cool the city. So there was a whole range. We announced the doubling of national parks area in the state, and all of that was important. People became really proud of what we were doing. I mean, I remember when we announced, we were one of the first places in the world to announce a ban on plastic bags, the non-returnable type that you get in supermarkets then. And a lot of people were saying to me, I think this is going to really anger the retail industry, and it did before it happened. That it's going to be, really annoy people shopping and cloth bags and everything. So we passed the legislation rather than catch people by surprise. We parked that legislation and then told them what day we were going to implement it. I don't know, 6 months, 9 months later. So it gave people a chance to prepare. The media went out on that day to try and interview shoppers, and I know what they were hoping for. They were hoping everyone's going to be going crazy about this imposition. Polling was done, 80% support from South Australians for what we're doing, and 90% of people under 30 from memory. So I guess, I was only really ever interested in 50.1 was always the percentage that I was interested in. But I think that it's about being brave, about doing the right thing, but it's also about first mover advantage. We had a huge first mover advantage that that was benefited our regions with wind power, benefited our on solar power rooftops, not just in Adelaide but elsewhere. So but we had a lot of opposition. Do you remember when I was gone, but there was a blackout? There was all these tornadoes, and I think something like 200,000 lightning strikes. All these giant pylons came down. It was all the fault of renewable energy. They were the same pylons that came down that would have been bringing the electricity from the coal-fired power stations. So, and then eventually there was a poll done about was renewable energy to blame, and the answer came back from South Australians, no. So, when you think about what the coalition is up to in Australia at the moment, with all this furphies about nuclear. I mean, what I say to people is always follow the money tree. Who is funding who in elections? Who are the big donors in election campaigns? Who are behind who are behind the third party campaigns, which we see so often? We saw them during The Voice, and it'd be I mean, I think that we have in South Australia truth in advertising laws that came in 1985, and there's still political parties around the country. We're the only state, I think ACT is about to do it, who are opposed to truth in advertising. And do they say you can't let's give free rein for people selling pharmaceuticals or foodstuffs. They don't, but for some reason they can't handle the truth. So I think it's good that the Australian Institute goes after what is the money moving behind politics? What is it about? Who is involved in it? And what is the desired outcome?
Yeah, because obviously in Australia, the fossil fuel lobby is both, I mean, extremely wealthy and very politically influential.
Mhm.
And I think there is that connection there. It's between, money and politics and influence there. So, can you talk to me as a former politician a little bit about that interaction between big, powerful interest groups, particularly the fossil fuel industry, and its influence on politics and trying to seek and oftentimes gaining very, favorable outcomes? Um,
Well,
what's your
obviously,
analysis of the influence of fossil fuel companies in Australia in particular?
I think it's been huge in Australia over the years. I mean, I can't understand why we're approving coal mines. Makes no sense to me. But also, the fact that we're subsidizing fossil fuel industries makes no sense in terms of, what we need to do to reach net zero. And, the good thing about the last election is that, for years, everyone was saying, not everyone, but the fossil fuel industry and its mates were saying things like, oh, you don't, this is scaremongering, that but what's happened is that now people's reality has caught up with what the scientists have been saying for years because of, we've had every month for the last 13 months worldwide has been the hottest month on record. I mean, look what's happening to the climate in Australia. Once in 100-year events, once in 150-year events, is basically happening all the time. Massive floods in Australia, record days in Western Australia during winter, record hot days. So I think that people are saying, yeah, okay, particularly women and young people. I think that the game is up. So we shouldn't be subsidizing. I think I saw 14.5 billion, saw someone else say 11 billion in fossil fuel subsidies this year. That makes no sense to me. I think it would be fantastic to see the federal government announce a phase out of fossil fuel subsidies. I think it would be terrific to see the Australian government also announcing an end to any further approvals for coal mines. And, and we've got to start selling the story, which is true, that gas is an important part of the transition to net zero. That's absolutely the case. But it's a transition, not the solution. And that's what I'm seeing happening in terms of advocacy by fossil fuel industries. It's kind of what I was saying before about it's the equivalent of vaping for the tobacco industry.
Um, just a reminder for people, we're going to come to questions from the audience in just a second. So if you've got a question from Mike, if you want to pop it in the Q&A box there, and we'll come to those very shortly. But yeah, I think that's a really interesting observation, Mike, about I like that analogy with the vaping for gas. And I guess you've talked a lot about that it makes no sense to be opening new coal. So obviously we've got new coal mines. We've got the International Energy Agency, the UN, many, many others all saying we need to keep existing fossil fuels in the ground.
Mhm.
Obviously, we've already got existing coal mines, plenty of them, as
Yeah.
well as gas fields. So really though, in Australia, that idea that we would at least stop approving new ones is still seen as very difficult to do. Where do we fit in globally? What are other countries doing? And why does Australia kind of need to get on with it, I guess?
as I say, I actually have been impressed with a number of initiatives that Chris Bowen has done. And for instance, I'm really delighted that I'm just checking the name of the organization, but the Net Zero Economy Authority that's been set up. And I'm just thrilled that Greg Combay has been asked to chair this. Um, I think he's outstanding. He was, when I was trying to get things going in South Australia on renewables at the time that he was Minister for Climate and Energy, was absolute privilege to work with. So, I've got great confidence in him. And as I understand it, that Net Zero Economy Authority is about brokering investments that create jobs in the region. So it's investment facilitation, it's assisting workers with the transition. You've got to do all of that. I mean,
Mm,
anyone can sit back in a chair and say, why haven't they done this? Why haven't they done it? I always ask people, so what are you doing? What are you doing? I got involved in Greenpeace back about in 1972 in New Zealand. And, you've actually, I ask people, if the people who attack others for not doing enough, even though they're doing things, I ask them what they're doing. And I think that's always a really useful thing, because it might provoke action at community level or even in their own lives. And I'm also pleased, and this might surprise people, but I'm pleased that Matt Keane has been appointed as chair of the Climate Change Authority. And I think that he's succeeding Grant King, who was the former head of Origin. But I think that we've got to try and do what we did in South Australia, which is build coalitions of support. Um, and so I think that what would be really good is if they announced a plan for let's start by saying we're going to not approve any more coal mines, any new coal mines in Australia. That would be heard internationally. And it comes down to, ultimately it comes down to political courage, and and all of these things that we did in South Australia, which saw the closure of the Port Augusta coal-fired power station. You're going to get a lot of flack along the way, but people actually want us to lead, not follow. And they certainly don't want to return to what we saw under the coalition, where we were literally a pariah up there with Trump on climate. And I copped it everywhere I went. I kept saying, hey, not me. Look at what we did in South Australia. Get off
yeah.
your backside, I'd say. So,
So speaking of the coalition, we've kind of touched a little bit on the nuclear distraction, but you're the current chair of the UK Climate Group, and I know that the UK has had some, I guess, pretty interesting experiences with nuclear energy development recently, including some pretty massively delayed and expensive developments like Hinkley Point C.
mm.
So, in light of some of that international experience, obviously Australia doesn't have a domestic nuclear industry compared to, say, somewhere like France that has had one for decades. What do you make of the opposition's nuclear proposal? Is there any way to take that seriously, or is it really just a distraction?
I think, as I said before, I think it's a distraction. I think that it's basically like it's the latest gimmick to delay action. When anyone announces we've got a technical fix, we don't have to do all this hard stuff. This will be taking over just in time for 2050. It's all about delay. It's all about basically giving a big breathing space to the fossil fuel industry, a fossil fuel industry that used to constantly attack any subsidies to get renewables going. But now that renewables are totally bankable and the price has gone down, wants subsidies for themselves. So all of these private sector arguments about, okay, look, it's really important to free market on energy, except they want subsidies worth billions from Australian taxpayers, where we've seen how little tax that they actually pay in terms. And I think the Australian Institute said that students paying HECS pay more in tax than gas companies do to the petroleum resource rental tax. So, I just think that I don't believe what the coalition are saying. I think it's just a ruse. I think that basically they're doing the political work of the fossil fuel industry. And again, it's really important to follow the money tree.
So I'm going to go now to some questions from the audience. So I've got a question here from Robert Day, who says, you've spoken about that we shouldn't be subsidizing fossil fuels. So how do we stop the lobbyists from pushing governments of either major party into such subsidies?
I guess what we need to do is to expose. We need better donations laws, and we need to expose who's funding what, so that people in the electors in election campaigns know where influence goes and how it manifests in terms of party politics.
The next question that I've got here is from Brett Edgerton, who says, what about tax reform to ensure that capital derived from continuing to pollute through the transition is taken from fossil fuels and transferred to those developing the most prospective technology for transition? So there, I guess we're talking about, carbon taxes and carbon prices and things like that.
I just think that it makes, when you think about how much the profits made by companies in terms of selling gas. I mean, you made the very best point. I'm sick of hearing Australians saying to me or sending me text messages or on Twitter, what we do in Australia makes no difference, so let's keep on going. That, we are the third biggest exporter of fossil fuels in the world. Are we saying that we can act without responsibility? And, Australia, when it comes to global warming, is the canary in the coal mine. And so, it makes no sense. We think that we're acting in the interests of Australians. We're acting by subsidising fossil fuels, by letting them get away with saying we need to import gas. We're acting against the interests of Australians.
Yeah, and for people interested in that, in particular gas prices, please head on over to the Australia Institute's website at australiainstitute.org.au. We've done a lot of research into this and gas prices in particular. And the reality is, as Mike has been saying, Australia is one of the world's largest exporters of gas. We currently export around 3/4 of Australia's gas. We use another chunk of that just in the export of it. We use a lot more gas even preparing it for export. So it's an absolutely huge industry, and over half of that, the multinational gas companies don't pay any royalties even on it as well. So we're not getting very much of a fair deal there.
Which makes no sense. And and what I'm saying about I'm not suggesting corruption. But what I am suggesting is undue influence, and I do think that if we had a more transparent political system or electoral system, if we did have truth in advertising, at least people would have the right to know who is who are the influencers and who does it benefit.
Yeah. The next question is from Chris Lee, who says, is it realistic to stop fossil fuel development and production while demand continues to rise or continues? Won't this just cause high prices, higher profits for producers, and hardship for poor countries who need to import fuel?
I mean, the point is that in South Australia, we've proven that you can actually, one of the things I took on these portfolios, climate change minister, social inclusion minister, and economic development minister. That was by design to prove that you can be committed to social justice, committed to climate action, and have a strong economy. And all of those things happened. Not only did they happen, we weren't thrown out. I mean, we're in government for 16 years,
Yeah.
and after 4 years, we're back again in office. So they're not mutually exclusive. Being, pro the public interest, pro climate action, and pro economic development. They're all interconnected. So I'm not suggesting that we act irresponsibly. What I'm suggesting is that we act responsibly in the interest of Australians, but also in terms of the interests of internationally. I mean, you raised about the Pacific. There's a reckoning coming on the Pacific. The Pacific Islands, there was mass panic by the Morrison government because of the influence of China on Pacific Islands. Why was there panic? It's because essentially we hadn't been paying attention as a country. We looked towards Asia, but we weren't looking towards the Pacific. New Zealand gets the Pacific better than Australia does. So, we've I think that we've got the Commonwealth heads of, there's a number of things coming. In October, we've got the Nature Positive Summit that Tanya Plebiscik is putting on in Sydney. That's going to be a huge world event. We've then got, about a week later, the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting, which is being held in Samoa. And at that, this will be the first one that the King presides over in his new role as head of the Commonwealth. And he's been a huge advocate for climate action and also for small island states and low-lying countries. So sea level rise is going to be pretty much high on the agenda at the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting, attended by 56 prime ministers. And they're going to be looking very firmly and clearly at Australia. And they've got an existential threat to their lives. The other good thing that's happening over the Samoa Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting is that the chair will be, and the host is the Prime Minister of Samoa, and she has been fantastic on climate. She's been in office since 2021. She will then become the chair in office of the Commonwealth for the next 2 years. So we're also getting a new Secretary General of the Commonwealth from the Global South, rather than currently it's from Britain, and that'll be from Africa. So I think we're going to see a lot more pressure on Australia to lift its game. And then at the G20 the following month is being held in Rio, and President Lula has said this is going to be the climate G20 and the oceans G20. A big focus on Brazil because the following year COP30 will be held in the Amazon in Brazil, again chaired by President Lula. So I just think that, the polluters are going to be, and those that are lagging behind are going to be pretty much in the gun.
Mm.
But all I can say politically is that what is happening for federal Labor is light years better than what happened before, and even more better than what we're likely to see under Peter Dutton.
And if I can just add to that, Chris Lee, in particular, addressing that issue about hardship for poor countries who need to import fuel. And I would just point to the fact that Australia is not, exporting coal and gas to poor countries to help relieve their energy poverty, really. We're exporting to countries like Japan, who are then on-selling our gas. It's not like Japan has a shortage either. And then I would also just point out that Australia's only really relatively recently started exporting LNG overseas. We used to have quite a small domestic gas industry that was very reasonably priced. And we've massively increased production of gas. And what's happened to Australian gas prices? They've at least tripled with no kind of end of that in sight. So it doesn't necessarily follow that we can just increase production and that's actually going to reduce Australian prices now that we're connected to the world market. So I just wanted to address a couple of those other things there. What else have we got here? So we've got a question here about Richard Bentley, who asks that public and private renters, as well as slow adopters, still miss out on some of the benefits of renewable energy. And that, there's obviously moves to retrofit some public housing, but it really does barely touch the sides. What more can governments do to extend the benefits of renewables and clean energy to everyone? And maybe there's something specific to South Australia that you could talk to there, Mike.
I think that it would be, with housing trust, housing commission homes, I think it would be terrific to see a major effort in terms of public housing with renewable energy. I know that it has happened around Australia, including in South Australia, but I think it would be terrific to see a big push on that front. Yep.
Mm. Leela Sedano has asked about what about stopping fossil fuel industry sponsorship and greenwashing of events and public institutions and things like that.
I think that's kind of happening, and I think it's useful for people in, civil society, members of the public, to actually, call it out, and and so and a number of arts organisations have already done that, but I think that it's important for civil society to call it out and make it a debate.
Linda Tolberg has asked, how do we overcome resistance in regional areas? And I think there maybe Linda is asking about the fact that, we're seeing a lot of kind of very regionally focused groups popping up in opposition to specific wind and solar projects, including offshore, even though it's not in anyone's backyard. We've seen Peter Dutton addressing this idea that offshore wind farms somehow hurt whales, that kind of thing. You talked about that big public education piece that you did in South Australia. How can you overcome that kind of resistance that we're seeing in some sections of the community?
Well, remembering the famous quote from a famous Australian Labor figure that always back a horse called self-interest because it's the only one trying to win the race. I mean, the great thing we had in South Australia was that what we were doing, encouraging wind farms, was of massive benefit to the regions. And so, you were seeing in small towns in the mid-north of South Australia, you're seeing motels being booked out, restaurants, pubs, everything. It was a boost to local areas. And I was reading the other day, I think it was from Chris Bowen, talking about the regional push that he's doing on renewables, that there's going to be money set aside in each of the projects. I think this was for big batteries and for local apprenticeships, for, sort of community benefits. But I met, because people, farmers are paid for the wind towers that are on their properties. I met people in South Australia telling me that they were making more money from their wind powers than they were from their sheep. So you've got to sell the benefits. It's a hard sell, but people will respond and then start defending. I mean, the great thing about all of this, because politicians like to stay in office, just like business people do, just like NGOs do and everything else, is that there was huge public support for what we were doing. And it's interesting, one of the things that I should have mentioned before that's happening in South Australia, which is a regional benefit, is that they're building a giant hydrogen plant, converting seawater at Whyalla. I think it's going to be finished in the next few years, and it'll be a hydrogen power station, which of course also is about, along with big batteries, in terms of providing grid stability. So again, it comes down to leadership. This is the Malinauskas government's big contribution. Jay Weatherill did the giant battery that has started a whole wave of them around Australia. And so you've just got to keep building along and also bring people with you. And that's going to be massive benefit to Whyalla, which is, one of the biggest, second biggest regional city, just as the wind farms were a benefit to other parts of South Australia.
Mm. You've talked a little bit about gas being a transition fuel, but that it's not a solution. Wasim Saman has asked, how do you feel about federal and state Labor support for gas until 2050 and potentially opening new gas fields?
You know, we've got enough gas being produced, as we pointed out, with, you know, a vast bulk of it being sent overseas. In fact, you know, that they use more gas in the processing that turns gas into LNG than I think is used by the whole electricity grid, for, you know, for consumers. So, you know, my view is that we need to announce to the public what the plan is. I saw some reports about post 2050. That makes no sense to me. But, you know, let's kick off with a ban on future coal mines. That will send a real signal.
Mm, mm. And it's the one that most countries, correct me if I'm wrong, Mike, like they're trying to get out of coal first. That is really one of
Yeah.
the key things that's happening internationally. The other question that I've got here is more a political one from Jeff Wilson, who asks about the prospects for change if state and federal governments find themselves in minority or power sharing governments with climate conscious crossbenchers. So obviously we saw a lot of Liberal seats fall to Teal politicians.
Mhm.
At the last election. But yeah, what's your view on that development politically?
I mean, it was always, I mean, frustrating when the Greens, and my wife is a member of the Greens, has been for decades, but I always got her preferences. Um, that you know what happened back in the time when they backed Tony Abbott. Tony Abbott opposed what the federal government was doing in terms of its emissions trading scheme because the Liberals don't like renewable energy, and then the Greens supported them because it wasn't perfect enough. So what we really need is the mainstream parties to adopt this, and we also need the Greens to actually and Teals to work with mainstream parties. So it's very. Can I just say, I used to be a protest leader in New Zealand. We need more than protesters elected to parliament. We need to actually have people who really want to see progress. It might not be instant, but again, it's about bringing everyone along rather than just shoring up your small base.
Yeah, and did you think like the Greens kind of learnt that lesson with the subsequent parliament and minority government with Gillard, where they really worked together? Um, uh, and I think Greg Combay was climate minister there too, on a new package that kind of worked there. But also, I wanted to ask in particular about I guess the role of climate change in independents coming into the parliament a little bit more, and particularly winning seats from the Liberal Party, because often that
Yeah,
was a direct kind of backlash to that Tony Abbott attitude that and the Peter Dutton, continuing that with the delay and distraction there. Do you think that's a trend that we'll see continue?
I can't see the Liberals winning back those Teal seats. I mean, it was an extraordinary event in Australian politics to see some of their safest seats go down the drain. And that is also a pretty effective roadblock to Peter Dutton's return to power. And it's interesting that the he's taken the party further to the right as opposed to trying to sort of branch out. I mean, ultimately, the history of Australian politics has been around the centre.
Mm,
And because, again, in order to be sustainable in the long term, you've got to bring the majority of Australians with you, not just your mates. And, you know, a small band of supporters who feel good. So I think that it's quite clear, it seems, that the Liberals didn't understand the message they got from the election of those Teals. It's a pretty powerful one, and one that's, I think that I can't see the Teals in Australia backing the sorts of crazy notions like nuclear power and others that that the Liberals are currently espousing.
Yeah, and I guess I'm also interested as a former politician. To me, it's a little mystifying. Like, if they need a pathway back to government, they're going to have to win some seats from somewhere. But that real doubling down on nuclear energy seems to me that they've decided they're going to try and find seats elsewhere, not in those teal seats. It's quite an extraordinary strategy politically, because there's quite a few of those blue ribbon seats if they're
Yeah,
deciding not to pursue them.
and it's interesting. This is how old I am. I went with as advising Don Dunstan in January 1979 to Britain, where he was looking at the nuclear fuel cycle. We went to Windscale, which is now, they had to change its name to Sellafield because of the so many leaks and problems with waste disposal, radiation leaks, accidents, everything else. And then as a result of him seeing and getting the story, came back and nixed an embrace of nuclear power. But the key thing is as you mentioned, Hinkley Point. Everyone says, oh, if all of these opponents to nuclear power are talking about old technology, Chernobyl, 3 Mile Island, Windscale. But Hinkley Point hasn't even been completed. It's like a massive multi-billion-dollar blowout. And also a huge time blowout. So these things aren't viable anymore. The power they produce will be a lot more expensive than renewables, and the price of renewables is going down. So, that one day, some of the people that send me messages on Twitter, a few have come up already, are going to realize that they're kind of fighting a war that's pretty much over.
Yeah, the cost of renewables in particular is really accelerating the shift now, because the economics of it just make sense. It's where all the investment is headed.
So people say to me, you should listen to the private sector. The private sector, the world's biggest companies, are members of the climate group, and they see a real benefit for themselves in embracing renewable energy and carbon reduction. And I'm talking about the biggest companies in the world. So,
Mm,
we've got to catch up with what's going on in the rest of the world.
absolutely. Well, I'm afraid we're going to have to wrap it up there. Thank you very much, everyone, for your amazing questions. And please thank Mike Rann for joining us this evening. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you. All the best.
Um,
Thank you.
And don't forget, as I said, to register for our webinar with George Monbiot on the 19th of September. If you're at all interested in climate, the environment, protecting the environment, or the impact of neoliberalism on our attempts to protect the environment and address climate change, it should be a cracking webinar there. Don't forget to subscribe to the Australia Institute on YouTube and to our podcast, Follow the Money, Dollars and Cents, and our new podcast, After America, that tracks the impact of the United States presidential campaign and its implications for Australia. We thank you so much for your time this evening, Mike, and all your expertise. It was really great to hear your perspective. And in particular, I think that excellent example of South Australia and how you managed to get the transition going there when everyone was telling you not to. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching. If you'd like to keep up to date with all our latest research and work, sign up to our newsletter. Delivered every fortnight, it includes behind-the-scenes updates from Richard Dennis, an exclusive cartoon from Judy Horacek, details for our upcoming events and webinars, as well as explainers, graphs, and not to mention the latest cutting-edge research and analysis from the team here on the key issues that are facing Australia. Click the button on your screen to check it out.